Okay, so hello and welcome to just quite a short lesson. In terms of, I'm going to be combining 7 and 8. As you can see, 7's just a class activity, which I want to again touch base. More so, I mentioned on the group. Just give me a second. Okay. All right, excuse me, I'm just busy. Just got a bit of a flu here. Just blowing my nose here and there. So this is uh, so we can exclude the violent uh, snot going on. Okay, anyway, I just want to recap again. Look, I mean, I've said this on the group as well. Please, the attendance is not great at all. It's non-existent. We're not having anyone come, obviously, attend the classes, hence why the pre-recordings are here. Um, and this is going to be a bit of just an issue just in general. I don't want to bring up the formative as your end game, but to try and obviously get obviously your great gradings. And you have to understand the concepts and stuff, and I feel that it's going to be very detrimental because again we've seen this time and time again. Just attend the classes, be more interactive on the WhatsApp group, request your one-on-ones if you need so, and I would do so because again, you are part-timers, so just request some time with me whenever you and we can match up some like a schedule, and let's again just like get involved within our studies and again just excited about them at least. Okay. All right, so this is what I want to do with you based on the previous lessons, but because again the previous lessons we've all been recorded, I want you to have a look at what I'm going to be communicating through the WhatsApp groups over especially the next week, and I'm going to push this type of like group work, making sure that you can start working with each other, but also understanding dynamics between working, in a team and against obviously a team with a end goal. Where essentially in class, what I would like to do in the next time that I see you is that we actually run through the qualitative and the quantitative questions that you have come up with based on the guidance that is obviously your own self-study within the first 6 videos, 6 lessons, or 3 lessons, right? That have obviously been loaded to Cole Campus, including these ones here. And then I'll be the moderator, right? I'll be the moderator, and we'll also have some feedback from the other students, just to see what your thoughts are and whether you're on the right track. Obviously, trial and error is the best way to learn something. And so this is again a culture that I would like to cultivate. And again, I'm going to push this alongside obviously the department. So HOD will be in contact with you as well. That's not like like a threatening way. I'm just saying that we need to get this going. And I think maybe like a contact class will be the best way to maybe just start off and kind of recharge this. Okay, I will take the notes and I will give you the feedback with obviously what you have come up with and exactly why the questions were not correct or why they were irrelevant. And this is again based on lessons 6 and lessons 5. Okay, so I'm just gonna hop here for a second. Hang on, is there? Okay, all right. So lesson 8, and this is why we should focus on this today. It is quite a short lesson. I again will have a revisitation on just more interaction, so we can just and those that obviously do attend, we can just have a quick run through as a summary, like a summary of what has been going on between lessons 1 to 8. to see whether you are on track and whether you are obviously doing your part. Okay, but this is a new section in terms of moving away from quantitative qualitative studies and understanding like the introduction of radio. We're just now looking at the studio itself and looking at the technical aspects, right? Okay. On broadcasting as a whole. Let's just go through some of the equipment and look at, like let's say outside broadcasts or, obviously live broadcasts, outside broadcasts, live broadcasts at, a certain location, whatever it may be, versus, using our, producers in studio that control that, as well as just obviously on air and whether we're doing live podcasts or whatever it may be. What is the equipment that we actually need and make sure that we have to obviously master. So ideally, when we should be having workshops together. That's what the part-timers do in the first and second years. We'll have the workshops. I'll make sure that within the workshops as well that we do travel to the studios and make sure that you understand what the studio equipment is about. Obviously, have you, obviously in the dry studio, so the off-air studio, you'll be able to just do like a couple of runs on the playback system and on the desk itself, do some links and try and get into the mindset of understanding like what that pressurized environment is all about. But let's look at the hardware first. The first side of radio technology, hardware, and then obviously the software. But how our radio reaches the listener through radio waves and audio through the internet from and a mechanical and scientific standpoint. And obviously, the second side is the use of modern software. So that comes from our playback systems. So the playback system is something that we use to schedule our music and our spot breaks and even DJ links, whatever it may be, for different shows throughout the day and again throughout the weekend through and so on and so forth. And that is remastered, I say, and restructured by the music compiler with the program manager through various software platforms, software applications that are available to us. The most popular in South Africa being used is RCS, mainly by the SABC stations, and then we have Genesis, which is actually it's used by the privatized stations. Predominantly, we also use it here at Boston Media House as well on BMX Radio, developed by a South African citizen. He actually is he's a British descendant, or I say British. He's originally from the UK, but is a citizen here. So, very clever man, very kind, also like a great man to work with as well. And so it's also preferable. It's not that we do not have RCS representatives, or we don't have like we have RCS South Africa here, where you can get the technical support, etc. But with Genesis being obviously locally developed by this particular entity, we have that very much that hands-on kind of like privatized personal, uh, uh, you know, uh, call to action. If we have a problem with our software, we know exactly where to go. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyway, so let's just go with the broadcasting chain. Refers to the series of connections between the systems which we use, which are multiple systems, especially in 2020, 2023. Compared to, let's say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and especially obviously 40 years ago, where the systems were quite simple. We would use, let's say, either obviously tape systems, moving to CD systems. We still have, like those systems as backups in a lot of the studios, in case anything goes wrong, you have to have a backup of a backup of a backup to continue a broadcast. And, let's say the desk might fail, whatever it may be. And then we have, again, as I mentioned, the desk. The desks are variant. Depending on the I would say the financial standing of the station itself. The desks are super expensive, and a lot of the predominant majority of our community stations do have older discs. We also find that, I said that the construct of older discs is used in, let's say, music production as well. But because they look so different, and they have many different types of functionalities. You will see them on campus should you head off to the ground level. There next to the offices, you'll see that there's a sound lab, and we have sound studios, and we can produce music in two or three of them, I think. But there's one obviously in the main studio that it's being done. We have different desks for that, but and you'll notice the difference between a broadcasting desk and a, let's say, music production desk, or where again, obviously, just the functionalities are different. You'll see the different buttons, and again, different scaling, obviously, grading. I'm going to say. Um, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for now. It's like some dials and stuff, right? Everything is there is obviously manual control where we lift channels up and use different assign different channels to different aspects. So, for example, telephone lines, we will have internet lines. So, for example, if we want to play something off a like an online PC, when I say online PC, it's dedicated specifically to, let's say, using our WhatsApp, our software and our communication software, but also we could be, using it to broadcast a live YouTube, a recording or whatever it may be, right? We would have a line for that, ISDN lines for outside broadcast, ADSL lines also for outside broadcasts. So those are inputs that would be standard within every DJ's profile. So when you get to commercial radio, um, there will be a technician that will come and will customize the desk, which is rather large, but made up of like 16 channels or so. And we'll customize it according to your show. And again, because maybe you are hosting a sole entity show, so it's only just you, and you don't need all the fixings of, let's say, a team show. Like, so we'll have, let's say, for example, when news might come out, or let's say you do have co-hosts and you do have sports and whatever it may be, in traffic and such, where they will be using their own systems as well to be playing, certain audio, whatever it may be. We will now obviously customize the entire desk. We don't need more than 16 channels. I mean, it's that's where it kind of stops. You'll see that in our studios, we have, I think we have eight. I think we have eight, yeah, right, eight channels that we use, and that's more than enough as well. To make sure that we, dedicate again ours in particular. We have an ISDN line, obviously we have our internet line, we have our WhatsApp line, and then we have our channel lines for that we particularly use with Genesis, the playback software, to obviously execute our shows, right? Our output links are also telephone lines, so internet lines, which are for streaming. Again, satellite links, FM signals that are caught and routed by an FM transmitter, and so on and so forth. There's a great variation. Again, you won't really. I mean, it's safe to say that that you're not going to see duplicates of studio customizations for the desks and the channels, etc. And the way that obviously the studio is set up, that's exactly the same as another station, or might be. You might find that consistency under a certain, let's say, so a media house, so for example, your Prime Medias or your Coquistos, again within the SABC, because there'll be technicians that are obviously teams that obviously are uh, dedicated to the upkeep and the responsibility of those studios. We'll find that again, that setup will be the same, but it is at the end of the day just a customized version of what it is that we do with products, and hardware products in this case, hardware and software. Okay, so there's just a little bit of an infographic, right, where we have the studio there, we've got the remote line, studio line. So let's say we, like I said, the SABC will definitely have remote studios in different provinces that we might have our presenters be out, out in Cape Town or whatever it may be, let's say for five or Metro, and still be able to broadcast their shows going to like a remote, um, a remote office building for the SABC itself. And obviously that is orchestrated and scheduled, whatever it may be, so there aren't any clashes, etc. Yeah, internet, obviously our internet lines and our telephone lines on the one side, and then again we have our links, our transmitter links, our telephone links, satellite, internet-based links, etc. So there's just a little bit of a graphic to kind of understand that the disk is in the middle and controls everything. It's not as easy as saying, well, okay, I mean, the disk is once the disk is there, and so once the whatever technician is in charge of, let's say, setting up the profiles, whatever it may be, has done what they need to do, and then it kind of you have no more work to do. Like you have to be very proficient in understanding like being trained in a disk. And when you start out in radio for us, like when I started at Campus Community, like you had to do your studio controls. In other words, you had to pass a test to be able to go on air. So what the program manager would do with us is that we would, on a 12 o'clock show, while there was a broadcast being done, let's say in the production studio, they would switch studios so that we would practice and actually run the tests and like I said, the studio controls within the actual broadcasting studio. But again, we would change channels so that the live broadcast would now come from the production studio. The production studio, we have to have at least two studios within any station, just because there will obviously be technical failures and technical problems, and we're going to have we need to be able to continue our broadcasts like immediately. Let's say there is the dead air, it's fine, it's understandable. But to have dead air for anything longer than 15 minutes would be something that would be peculiar to a listener, and they would, they would definitely tune out. Most likely after 2 or 3 minutes of the white noise, and there's nothing happening there. But ideally, because our technical department is so obviously is well trained, just like you would be if you are on air, or if you're part of sales, whatever it may be, they get the problem fixed quite quickly so that they can actually focus on. They transfer the broadcast so that they can fix up whatever they need to do, and then we need to move on. But the job must be able to act immediately and quickly to problems. So that there isn't a complete mess. Especially we've got clients that are paying for adverts. Again, we want listeners to not be disrupted, and they kind of move away from the transmission that we are busy with. We want to, again, it's expected to, so a listener would expect you to kind of get your problems, solved. So in other words, you know what you're doing. This is your space, and as a station, you would fix something and not sit there and say, "Well, I'm kind of puzzled with this," or whatever it may be. So, with obviously the addition to moving into the digital space as we have now for the past, let's say, 2 decades, quite easily. We have to obviously have a large understanding again as how that, and getting where everything goes and getting where everything is connected, and knowing whether the channel is on or off. It's pre-faded, which means that we are listening to it off air. Like let's say if we want to hear a voice note, what it sounds like before we go play it on air, we will pre-fade it. Like to know the different buttons, to know what where obviously we have different settings being changed, and where things should be switched on and off is something that you should, if you for whatever reason do not have an introduction to, or do not have proper understanding or clear understanding, should make sure that you do, instead of rushing off and just starting a show, making sure that your program manager or your managers, your department manager, shows you exactly what it is that you don't understand. Keep going through it, keep going through it again before you go and miss the online product. Again, it's a live medium. And so every second that is, well, I mean, it's every second and its quality, well, will have an immediate role on and ripple knock-on effect. Okay, all right. So, all right, the broadcasting chain. So we have again the permanent studios and our remote studios. Most again, most stations in general, so both community and again the commercials definitely will have your outside broadcast studios. So like that'll be both equipment that you can either set up at a location, right, or it will be a van, so a portable, movable van, a studio that will be set up and that will go and it will travel to different events, whatever it may be that are agreed upon, most likely with your marketing, PR, and sales team, as to like a bit of a connection with your activation, which is again defined as a long rollout of a sponsored segment, within a show, by a certain client. You want to go and let's say do it at let's say let's say want to go say Checkers just because I work. I'm always at Checkers anyway. Suppose Checkers is opening like a hyper the biggest hyper store in the country, and the thing is massive, and it includes everything, and it's like this definitely a first for South Africa. It would be very normal to expect that the station that they've chosen to be a partner in promoting and obviously advertising this particular opening would be, there to, in the middle of this opening with a lot of specials, a lot of traffic happening. I'm saying to like a lot of feet through the store. So we're getting a lot of, advertising ourselves, also being a touch field product for the station. I'm saying to you with the presenters and again the teams that are live and again are accessible to the public, even just through by sight, maybe not by exactly going up and meeting them. But that's certainly not out of the question. We do want to be able to connect, and we'll find that the activation and the agreement, let's say with Checkers now, massive, hyper, gigantic store, South Africa, would say you would have to interact with a lot of our customers, give them some prizes. That's what we're paying for, whatever it may be, and that's what you have sponsored, obviously budget for, etc., like that, right? So we would find that they would have different types. We wouldn't need obviously like a broadcasting van to do that. We have to set up like an ad hoc studio. Again, like with that, technical problems are high risk. In other words, they are high probability and they have a high impact. So that there's a high probability of it happening, something happening, and the impact of it in terms of like our like what we might have to obviously then face up to or whatever it is, and it could obviously affect the quality that we have and the expectations with our clients, etc. Also with our listeners, the high quality, high risk, high probability. These have to be managed very, very carefully and have very high priorities, and for all the managers that are involved in the departments that are involved, to make sure that nothing of the that should any particular identified pre-identified risk occur and come into being, you'd want to be able to deal with that and have like all hands on deck, right? The remote studio is a main site again. So again, I completely went off, just closing off the previous slides here. Okay, so the remote studio is again what we find predominantly with the SABC. So a lot of the SABC shows will have again the presenters in different provinces, as they are they either for work or let's say are they for their own, let's say it's branding or events or whatever it may be for the station. It doesn't really matter. They'll be able to go into like I say, a remote studio, do their shows there, and then, like we said, with the SABC. But because Kakiso, let's say, will have the OFM, the Jacaranda, the East Coast Radio, for example, conglomerate over there, and plus more, we would also be able to accommodate, let's say, like a syndicated show that comes from from KZN. I'm saying the KZN East Coast studios. They'll have like about, let's say, four studios that you can broadcast from, not two. And let's say there is a presenter that lives in in Durban. They will be able to do a show on for Jacaranda using one of those remote studios. So again, Prime Media will use the KFM Cape Talk versus the 702 947 ones, and again, we would have that kind of same kind of structure follow through in all the kind of, I say, the conglomerate monopolies that control the different sects within our radio space here. Okay, so having access to the remote studios help radio stations manage the delivery of radio shows, regardless of where the on-air presenters may be. The OBs are less like physical studios and studio spaces, but more like pop-up mobile studios. So there's kind of that these are very, very um, small sample versions of what is considered to be a little tiny broadcast. This you'll definitely have seen this kind of setup during COVID, and every so the presenters would have a small little desk there that they would have at home. They would have a microphone and they would have the headphones, and would have someone in studio. Specifically, when no one was allowed, there would be one person. There would be technical. There would be obviously a technical person that could control. You could even call and control remotely. But because the jock had control of a desk, they safe like obviously just to be safe, and again doing risk management there, you would have to rather have someone in the studio just in case something has gone wrong and transmission or broadcast needs to be taken over, and so many things because the jocks at home with this new equipment that they had. If you remember any of the quality of the broadcasts back then, they weren't really great. One, just in terms of sound, because not every single person has a soundproof studio within their home. They would do it like in the most soundproofed room. Perhaps that might have been like a bedroom, which would have its natural, let's say, sound reduction. I say materials, so for example, pillows and blankets or whatever it is. Close the windows, make sure that the doors are closed, no one is in the house while you're broadcasting. But you could hear that it was obviously somewhere else, and people were understanding with that because they knew the situations. And well, it became a bit of an issue when there were teams because they couldn't really see each other. But that was also not an excuse. You could do that virtually, where they could actually see each other and use kind of that eye contact. And which I don't think a lot of stations actually went that far or felt that the need of actually going that far to make sure that the quality of what was going out was still to the best ability maintained. But we would find these little, like I say, remote, as you can see, most of the channels just over here, again there, and then obviously again the different types of buttons and dials and stuff that the DJ would be familiar with. Particularly within those particular broadcasts, would have some training, whether it had been virtual because it was in the really neck deep depth of COVID threat levels. And so, anyway, let me just not carry on further with that. If it is an outside broadcast, and I'd say, for example, we'll have that now, and we had that beginning last year, just to kind of like revamp and again, kind of put that, relight that spark in our brand. A lot of stations did do outside broadcasts, say, hey, we're back, would have like much larger desks, right? With a little bit more complication in terms of like uh, uh, the controls and stuff. Definitely a technician on board, definitely with a team, and again, knowing that with ISDN lines and ASDL lines, etc., would have to be constantly on guard, right? So there's the 5 Drive team on location. So that looks so very simple, whatever it may be. But like you see, obviously the masks there. done during a COVID threat level of whatever it may have been, or in the different stages. Might have been at stage 3 or so, maybe even stage 2, just because it was common courtesy to leave your masks on as it is. And so it was, again, just discarded at the beginning of last year. Okay. With the newsrooms as well, we have to look at how the newsroom is constructed, and also run. We must understand that, the newsroom is a super busy place. I mean, it is constant chaos. It's quite actually lovely to um, witness, as a jock, like you would I would walk past, and you would see just like the fluidity which would come as a result of a really great news manager. So we would see I would see the news manager is obviously kind of elevated, should be an office, and there would be this great fluidity between the different departments, field reporters that are out giving us, let's say, live reports, or busy, constructing stories, as sending through sound bites. They would have to be on. There would be online department. There would be the actual on airs, the anchors that also I was working at Prime Media, so we had EWN. EWN is a really, like, it's a beast on its own. And it was just it was great to watch as well, just the way that like a journalist and the journalist department, news department, their entire approach to quality work was about that's just that massive, like say, workspace chain, so the output chain, input output chain, and many different cogs that would contribute to just them being on top all the time, right? uh, so this is also, it's also one of those things where, like, news is made up of the word new. So literally, we don't really care much for someone that is maybe 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours late on something that was like a top story, or it was a breaking news. And again, this is a lot of pressure for the staff in all departments within the umbrella of the news room, because again, we have to have it obviously digitally available, and we have to have it on air immediately, and we have to obviously check our resources and our sources, and our factual process must be solid, and there mustn't be any opportunities or cracks, whatever it is, where we might be putting out what might borderline fake news because it's not well researched, and so there's a lot of different checks that have to be, they exist in repetition, because there is a lot of, again, knock-on effects that could happen just from like incorrect news being broadcast too. Uh, so I'm just going to pause there for a second just to get through some of the points here, and then I'll just go back to that. So it's received through listeners who believe that their local station knows what is going on, and also depend on the news to be factual. Like, it's not a tabloid. No station is a tabloid. We don't build on, and we do not encourage at all to no limit. There is no tolerance on even the jocks drawing content and ideas, or whatever it may be, on sources that are opinionated, highly opinionated, left bias, right bias, whatever it may be, um, and definitely fake news, because people believe you're still a form of an investigative journalist as a broadcaster, because you do prep, and you do, again, in that, go through a process of making sure that what you are supplying to your audience is something that they can believe, and you lose immediate credibility should you not adhere to just making sure that you're not misleading anyone by by some kind of agenda or slash again, and like a falsified news that hasn't been researched or prepped well, right? So again, it is mandatory and expected without having to say that the news itself, I mean, that comes off our or comes out on air, is factual again, structured again, controlled, and definitely dependable. Okay, so and that is also made of different factors. So we have our traffic departments. Again, we have our digital departments. We have our business departments and our business financials. We have technical, so we're talking. So we must look at the far extent. Let's say, so for example, like a talk station, which is kind of like 24-hour news. Would have these particular, say, presenters slash journalists and teams or whatever it is that are focused on specific sects and areas, lifestyle, whatever it may be, politics, etc. And then obviously our current affairs and so on and so forth, right? The structure of the newsroom, we have the reporter's desks, right? The bulletin desk and the reader's booth. So when you find that, for example, like ENCA or EWN or the and SABC News itself will have now, they will have independent, they'll be considered independent entities to, let's say, the stations that they do provide the news to. And that's not a new thing. It's just more apparent right now. And we'll have news anchors. Like, let's say, if we're looking at news presenters versus news presenters, we look at, let's say, the SABC stations, and you look at, let's say, your Metro, excuse me, your five FIMS, you will have news presenters. So these are people that do not come up with the news. The news room will supply them with the bulletins, and they will only present. Whereas our privatized stations, those are journalists, and they have to be qualified journalists, and they construct news of their own as well. They will construct the bulletins that they do go out on air and do read. While again, they do have an entire team also supplying them and supplying the chain with more information, etc. Again, orchestrated and managed by the the manager, the news manager. Okay, but they will have their own booth, and when I say that, specifically applies to talk stations, but we do have that in music stations too, where they are part of a team. I'm saying, to let's say, a breakfast show that identifies a newsreader as a team member. They will do their news most likely and more often than not within the studio with the team so that they can interact, while others that are let's say, daytime newsreaders will go into the booth, do what they need to do. Talk stations do not have newsreaders as part of a team. They go in, they do their job, they go out, and they go and refresh that news, and they come back at the bottom of the top of the hour, right? Okay, we're nearly done. The reporter's desk there at some point, and so at some stations, the reporter's desk is labeled as the input section, right? So all members of the reporter's desk will have access to the same news production software. Again, this is again, then it's the same software that a reader will have in the studio itself, right? And again, there will be different bulletins that are decided upon both on the news anchor and again the news manager if necessary, because I mean the micromanaging is just not what a manager does. Otherwise, the output is ineffective and low quality. But I rather trust that the anchor will control what goes out on there. That's their job. Normally in 12 hours, I say 12-hour to 8-hour, uh, like let's say reporting, let's say sessions. So we'll have maybe a day and a night, a newsreader on talk stations, and that will stop at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock, depending on which what music station decides is considered nighttime radio. and where the bulletin will end for the bulletins will end for the day on music and music-based radio. Right. Increasingly, radio reporters are using their smartphones for news production purposes. Definitely. So again, we'll have some kind of whatever software that is, obviously, well orchestrated in terms of the complexity and the purpose of it. Like for example, news production software will have its app counterparts for again kind of that remote kind of that we have a lot of presenters that go out of province as well, or to far ends of the provinces that are associated that are allocated growing stories that have a bit of a long life, and so they will actually be based there, or they'll on the drive back and forth every day, taking a lot of their time. They will be again not in the station or at the station for the predominant lifespan of that particular long running story. And so we would have to have not just like a voice recorder to be able to send through, but now we have quite sophisticated apps that are available. News Boss is a news production software suite that is favored by a few radio stations, while others also include ENPS and Newsroom. The same basic software needs to be available to all newsroom journalists, whether they are copywriters, whether they are reporters, or they are editors. Okay, so everyone is on the same page, no repetition. Also, again, we don't want mistakes. There's fact checking, etc. Like I've said before, social media now is definitely like we have to have that immediately reflective of what we do on air. So we will again go to social media, see. I mean, you should know that, for example, like let's say the best place to do that it would be on Twitter. Make sure that you can't, let's say, create your own personalized groups, right? Or that will have only, let's say, news sources that you can depend on. Again, your BBC, your CNN, your SABC, your EWN, and so on and so forth, with your Times Live, and where you know that these sources are constantly updated to the best of their accurate ability. So, for example, let's say we have breaking news that some like let's say I say a person of influence, so a politician, a musician, whatever it is, has passed away. It is very dangerous to assume more than just the fact that they have passed away, and you'll see that all stations immediately will have some kind of maybe a 5 to a half an hour bracket, between the release of the statements, both on social media and their own, let's say, website portal and on air. But they will also understand that to assume anything more than what they know is dangerous, because that is obviously considered fake news, and we do not want to sensationalize anything that could once again threaten the quality of our brand. Okay. An example was this happened, and it might be seen as it was an innocent mistake, but it had a ripple effect. So there was a particular incident where there was a news anchor that she was reporting on the increase on fuel prices, right? And let's say at that point, I don't know, let's say it was 18 Rand 95 for a liter of petrol, whatever it may be, right? And this reporter went on air and said 18 Rand 59 cents. So when people obviously went the day before, because obviously we will have the news saying, okay, from 12 o'clock tonight, like the fuel price will go up, etc. They would go. They had gone to the stations themselves and would see this 95 cents being charged, and say, I that's not correct. Like, I've heard this as 59. You've got this incorrect. And so I'm actually just going to go to another station that is not charging more and has made a mistake. But after the second station, that they would have then used up their time, that kind of frustration, that kind of like a confrontation, whatever it may have been, and seen that that one was also, let's say, 95 cents, and immediately realized that the information on a commercial station was delivered incorrectly. And something so, like I say, it was an honest mistake, but it was basic information, which then, one, I mean, people were so frustrated and they made it very vocal to the station as to how displeased they were with how no one had come back on and quickly made an amendment to that, or that journalist didn't know how to construct her own news. I'm not laughing. I'm saying to you, it turned into a complete chaos situation where the station then had to go and apologize and again kind of justify why the apology is completely necessary, never going to be happening again, and the hope that something kind of lands, because also once again acknowledging that, which you have to do publicly, also admits that you have had a moment of like a lapse in judgment and control, which says that you're running an unprofessional situation on your side. Again, this has a ripple effect on just anything else that the listener will say. Well, I mean, yeah, the station's supposed to be like taking tons and like let's say over 1 million listeners, and making the most basic mistakes that not even a campus station would make. Anyway, the point is that like the smallest details are completely of the highest relevance in terms of what it is that you're going to say as facts and deliver that to your listener that has chosen to trust you. The report desk. So there's some requirements. The newsroom management requires that the radio station reports to the authorities regarding the content of the news. So some news software programs allows for the categorization of news items. We also find a database of people that we can actually talk to for if we want interviews, we want sound bites, whatever it may be. It's also shared across the station. So that the jocks and the shows can also have access to that. Every radio journalist is expected to add sound bites to their news copy. Once again, this must be high quality, again, with equipment that is supplied to them. And they've got to know the structure of what goes into a soundbite, how long it should be. They should obviously pre-edit it themselves, so it doesn't have to be done by another person. These are easy skills to know and obviously include within the job description and responsibilities. Noise cancelling software is often essential, as newsrooms are noisy places. Um, we have a lot of journalists sometimes that have to step outside. Ideally, they would step into a studio, depending on what kind of like background atmosphere they would like to have. They want a bit of like a bit of outside a white noise, uh, to add to the kind of the quality or the validity of what they are saying in the soundbite. They would step outside. Not often can you always get something at a location itself. And so they know this and they would use that. Otherwise, there would be, again, some reports. So, for example, our traffic reporters might be situated within the office themselves, and their particular mics, etc., will have noise cancellation software because there will be obviously a buzz that surrounds them, and so that will go on the air, but quite again slickly and quite beautifully, with a bit of that newsroom atmosphere. Many newsrooms have relationships with counterparts in their countries, so other news providers, some large newsrooms have dedicated sound monitoring sections where journalists monitor partner services and stations like BBC or CNN. We also might contract, let's say, people that are linked with. So, for example, let's say you are with the SABC at one of the stations there. We can use journalists like weather journalists, etc., that are on the SABC News. I'm saying television news, to be our weather reporters, and make it a lot more credible in terms of like that kind of cross pollination, and we'll kind of share that expertise, and we can always add color to anything to make it deeper and richer as an experience. All right, the bulletins desk, alongside the reporter section of the newsroom, lies the bulletins section. So this is sometimes referred to as the news output section. and it is where the copy editors and newsreaders are located. As I said to you, so there's like an influx of information that will go out, and then the newsreader will know what to use in terms of like their top stories, how that is managed, top local, top international, what might be used as a tail end, and what might be used as subsidiary news. Again, the bulletins on talk radio will be a lot longer, close to maybe 7 minutes, where the news bulletins on music radio could vary. Some do it very, completed in like 2.5, 3 minutes. Some take up to 5 minutes, and both are fine depending on again what it is that the program manager and the news manager decide might be the best strategy forward. Okay, again, the reader's booth is soundproofed, and there's software in there that obviously is synchronized to what is going out, and what is linked to a channel on the desk in the studio that is being broadcast from. So it's quite small. I'm just gonna increase the levels, and that's what I just include on top of this. So that is not part of your what you'll see find your textbook. Like you've got to become very, very habitual. So find a way to constantly do this when you are reading any news of any site. We don't often do that, especially when we are resharing stuff on social media. We just kind of read the headline, find it sensationalistic, and we share it across, and we don't check whether or not like the validity of the article, whatever it is that is true, whether it's fake news or not. Again, during COVID, like fake news found a long period of time, 2.5 years, to become almost invisible to people because there was so it was uh, there was just too much that was needed from us because every day was a new day in a way. We didn't know what was going to happen the next day and the next day, and we relied on all news sources, whether it be radio, television, digital print, social media, whatever it may be. And so the fake news really found a place to really solidify its stance and its power on spreading whatever it may be. So it's partnered up with what we call clickbait, um, where a lot of clickbait sites are that they will give, let's say, a heading that is sensationalistic, and for an article that is shared. You'll click there. There'll be an alternative motive. For example, there might be phishing, or you'll start getting these stats that are drawn from you and shared to different paid entities, whatever it may be. But also, because if you drive traffic to your site, and you drive consistent traffic, you'll have a lot of digital advertising that is, obviously it's lucrative. But once again, to fact check what is opinion pieces, which also became very close. It's a very close likeness to fake news, because we can use a standpoint that is true. So one statement that we can say allegedly, or we can use as a front end for anything and everything else that comes in the article that is considered then opinionated slash fake news, sensationalistic news, made up news, right? And people will just reshare immediately, hardly even, hardly never ever check, because you must think of your everyday, internet user that doesn't feel like even reading articles anymore. We just reshare headlines, right? Never mind go and fact check. So you have various sites that are particular fact checkers for certain outlets. So here we have like the Washington Post fact checker, where the Washington Post is like it's a legacy brand. It's particularly now aimed here foreign policy, economic policy, what happens in the White House, and American kind of politics and stuff, right? There are also PolitiFact, again focused towards transparency, fairness, clear writing when it is involved with journalists that have to journalism that is involved in governmental facets. So fact check is great. This is my favorite site, Media Bias Fact Checker. We can actually go and you can actually just copy and paste the URL, And for the majority of the time, for especially um, larger sites, it will give you a full analysis on what, like how much percentage it is left biased, right biased, centered, opinionated, factual, non-factual, whatever it may be, right? And if not, it will then say this is now submitted for revision. It's under revision. Because it's a smaller site, and 10 to 1, you can believe that, okay, well, let me just assume this might not be a site that I can actually trust. So please put these as bookmarks on your on your PC when you are using on your phone when you are exploring the net, and then start using them to like obviously just support the quality of what your sources and content that you're creating the sources, using the sources to create from, are dependable. All right, provide what you think are the characteristics of a good journalist, right? And that can be, you can go research that, that's fine, but ideally, like, you should also just assume and try and think of, I mean, the best thing is to have ethics. That's the main thing, is to have ethics, to not be tempted by the rush of getting a good story, but rather to get a good story that is the truth, and you should fight for that. And it sounds kind of mushy, but it isn't. That is your job, to make sure that the correct and factual news is shared with the larger public, right? Um, why is it more important now than ever to check your news sources? So I just went through that, but I would like you to go and explore some of those sites, and maybe click on the one or two or three or four or five links that you find on Twitter reposts, or again Facebook especially, LinkedIn as well, is because these are content heavy platforms. So the content is actually shared more so than, again, like Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and stuff, where it's more video and stuff. All right, and then Google water shortages South Africa, and go to the news tab in the search results, right? So use the fact checkers for 3 results and share what you have found with me the next time I see you. Yeah. Right. So that is that for this week. I'm just going to stop that share. So again, once again, I'm just going to make sure that I touch base with you and encourage, again, kind of almost push in the next week, so week and a half. So let's say post the 21st actual public holiday, starting from Wednesday, to check where everyone is, and to make sure that we are starting afresh. All right, and moving forward with strength and stability. All right, have a great long weekend, and I will see you/speak to you soon.